God began to deal with my heart that there's an epidemic of fear coming. And I mentioned that there are three groups of people. God is dealing with all three groups of people, but how and what can He use to begin to bring the people into the fold? Because as He deals with this, we were talking about Ernie's granddaughter this morning and some attachments and wealth, and she had been someplace. And in order for, there is a reason why God was going to use this fear. And as I began to ponder this, there are things that started to come in my mind. Because basically, fear always springs from ignorance. And actually, Francis Bacon said there is nothing is terrible except for fear of itself. And so, fear is a painful emotion excited by the expectation of evil or of impending danger, or due regard as of persons of authority or worth. The epidemic is a fear of a disease arriving from a widespread cause affecting a whole people during the same period. That's a broad statement because it affects everybody at the same time. So as that begins to happen, what it's saying is, here's an interesting word when it comes to an epidemic, nobody is immune. So in reflecting on this great ingathering that God someday will begin to work, is going to come by just natural means or by just preaching. God has to do something to separate people. And as a result of that, the first time the word afraid appears is in Genesis 3:10, where if He doesn't address this, we wouldn't have any. There would be no fear. But because of what Adam did, He said, I was afraid. First time the word afraid. Now because of what he did, that affects everybody from that time on. So when I began to think in terms of fear, fear always imposes a threat. And wherever there's a lack of love, there will be a heavy evidence of fear. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, the Word of God says, God has not given me the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Therefore, when I began to talk about this expression of fear, fear is not psychological in this context. If God uses an international epidemic of this, there is a reason for that. Wherever this word starts to be reduced or lost, fear begins to replace it. In Matthew 24:12, it says, the love of many waxes cold. Now, this is cold love. This was what affected the Laodicean church, because the love for that whole church became cold. We live in it. So we have all kinds of preaching today. It doesn't lack volume or content, but it lacks a basic, that's love, because we got more preaching today on all over than we've ever had in the history of the world. But it isn't affecting the core. For example, when you go back and talk to all the Christians that you're talking about who are indifferent to each other in marriage, or they've separated, or they've gotten divorced, that's what's lacking in the heart. Jesus said that because the love of many would be cold, iniquity would abound. You get to the point where now you can't tell anybody anything. When that begins to happen, this word takes over, and all kinds of things begin to fill the vacuum for this word fear.
I have two questions. First of all, what's iniquity?
I'm sorry?
What's iniquity?
Iniquity.
What is it?
I say it again.
What's iniquity?
Oh, sin and iniquity are not the same. You've heard of the term iniquity?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll explain it to you. This word appears for the first time, well, actually not the first time, but has its origin in Ezekiel 28. This word is introduced into the universe before there's ever an earth. Satan, who was God's prime minister, violated God in 5 different areas by exerting his will against God. He was the anointed cherub. That's in Ezekiel 28. When I go to Isaiah 14, you'll find out exactly what he did. 5 times he says, I will. The minute that he exercises his will against the will of God, the universe has lost its harmony. The minute there's a second will that opposes God, there is no harmony. He rebelled in heaven, took a third of the angels with him. Then apparently God sets out a new program, but he says to the anointed cherub, he says, because iniquity was found in thee. Thou wast perfect in all thy ways from the day that you were created until iniquity was found in thee. So this was introduced by Satan, and it's irrevocable for him because he introduces this violation of God. We come to man on the face of the earth gets visited by Satan now, and as you know, he's tempted, and he listens, and he falls by listening to the suggestions to violate God. He doesn't introduce the violation. He listens as God's new creation. Then he acts on what Satan has put in his ear, and he violates God. And now iniquity inhabits him, but it doesn't have a definition for him until he goes out and he does something in some kind of an act that violates God, and for him it becomes sin. This becomes an act. 2 laws are at work in every human being on the face of the earth. The minute a child is born into the world, he is born in this principle. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. That's why you never teach him to do the wrong thing. He comes forth, and you got to start teaching him to do the right thing. Because of this law. The minute he comes out of the womb and he now can do something to violate what you told him not to do, he sins. Whenever you do what God tells you what you shouldn't do, you sin. But because of Christ's sacrifice, we have the means to have that cleansed from us. But God is constantly trying to eradicate this in us. This is before the foundation of the earth, introduced by somebody who cannot be redeemed because he introduced it. This is a result of what I've received because of that transaction. And now it's at work in my behavior, but once I come to Christ, it's all forgiven in my past. Both my condition of this and my behavior, all is washed by the blood. Once I start this process of being born again, God only begins to deal with this. This condition has been eradicated, but be still, all of the evidence is still with me, I can sin. Now, if I confess it, the blood of Christ erases anything my behavior has been involved in. The two are not the same. Anytime I sin and don't confess it so the blood cleanses it, I walk back in this principle. Jesus said, many will come to me in that day and say, Lord, we did all these wonderful works in your name. And he'll look at them and he'll say, depart from me. Listen to this, you worker of iniquity, I never knew you. One of the reasons things wax cold today is because we have so many relationships of all kinds, including marriage, where this exists. In a divorce, this is the type of, when you're talking to somebody, both saved and unsaved, they begin to talk about their first marriage. They say, my ex, with disdain. I was interviewing a man for a position, a spiritual position, and he says, my ex, he's in his 3rd marriage. He's a born-again man. He wants to minister. I says, you know what? You've got a problem. You're walking iniquity. Now what displays itself is fear develops out of ignorance. He reacted against me. You know, the minute he said to me, my ex, he's walking iniquity. You know why? He's never forgiven her. There's never been reconciliation. And from the day that attitude developed in him, he walks in cold love. Now Jesus said at the end of the age, what would be happening is the entire population would be growing cold. People would be divorcing. Love starts to be eradicated. And when the eradication of love takes place, this begins take over because nobody's getting rid of the sins that they committed. They commit their sins and then continue to walk in them, become blasé, and frankly, what rises in its place is blame. It was really your fault. Furthermore, there's a thorn that exists when you blame somebody, and if you don't eradicate it, the thorn of blame, you can't forgive somebody. The minute there's a lack of forgiveness, love is waxing cold. Unforgiveness ultimately just pushes this matter right to the top of the roof. God says, because of that, he said, he has to begin to do certain things, because when you eradicate this, then fear begins to take over. Somebody says, what kind of fear? Let's say, for example, this couple just got divorced and there's a child. Instantly what this woman's going to be is afraid of her security. So right here, she's going to fear security. What's going to happen to me? What does that do with God? Behind the scenes, God is making this statement. If you lose your life, you find it. And if you find your life, you lose it. There is so much behind that statement. I was taught, as I began in this Bible study to unfold, there's so much behind that. What will you hold to in life that God says you got to give up? This person who has just gone through, this woman with this child just going through this divorce, is fear of her security. If she knows Christ, the first thing God wants to deal with her is one thing. I want you to cut loose of your fear of security and trust who?
God.
That's right. But in Matthew chapter 16, if she's holding on to this, that's what she's living in. I can't get... Next thing, for example, let's look at the economy. We're talking about economy is starting to go cold, and it is growing cold. God says, I'll tell you some other things that you're going to be afraid of. Your job. All those people up in Parma, Ford is pulling out. What does that create? What?
Fear.
Fear. God says, I will identify everything in your life that you're holding on to, because if you don't have what I'm talking about when these things really crunch, you won't get it when you get into it. You must have a freedom from fear before God gets into these things, because if not, you'll get cardiac arrest, and I'll show you where that's going to happen. It's good.
I want to know if this is the same thing you're talking about. I see a trend of a fear of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing in the name of love, like political correctness. Is that along the same lines?
All of it's along the same lines, because we're getting, God says, fear one thing. Who? Fear me. Now, I want to direct your attention to something in order to get the fulfillment in 1 John chapter 4. There's an antidote for this. I can tell you the antidote, and I can tell you how to get saved, but if you don't act, you can't get saved. You follow me? The antidote is, because he says it, best thing to do is go over and read it. 1 John chapter 4. Now, chapter 4, and we'll pick it up in verse 17. Once I come to Christ, he has one thing that he wants to perfect in me. This epidemic that I'm talking about is going to be so prolific that when I see these things coming, he says he's going to shake heaven and earth. When my heart starts to be affected, that can take so much, and then I lose my orientation. I get outside of my parameters. For example, if you were in Greensburg, Kansas this morning, it's all gone. What are you going to do? I look out to the city, the community, it's all gone. There's nothing out there. My job is gone, my home is gone, my possessions are gone, my money's gone, everything's gone. The Bible refers to terrorists as tormentors. Now, in 1 John chapter 4, I can read this. Everybody will agree with it because we can read it. You remember the Al-Qaeda connection? Remember that book? Right. Didn't it really ring your bells? When I read that book, I have to admit, when I put it down, I was afraid. You agree?
Right.
Today, that thing doesn't mean anything to me. It's as if it has disappeared from the scene. But the day that I finished reading that book, I could hardly breathe because I said, this is exactly what's happening. Don't you agree? This book is happening right by the numbers. The Trojan horse is being dragged into America, and very soon all hell's going to break loose because we're blind. Now, in order for me to get through what's going to happen, I have to have going in what I'm going to tell you. Now, when I tell you, it doesn't mean that you've got it, but it does mean you can ask for it. If I present something that you can't ask for and get from God, everything that we say has no value. Why? I believe the next ingathering is going to be that when these people move into this 1 John chapter 4, they are going to be the precursors of those that will be part of this great ingathering, because when it happens, the people are going to run to the church saying, is there anything to this? Help. They're not going to be interested in anybody. They're just going to say, is there anything to this? Because we know there is. In the midst of this hell breaking loose, I can stand there and stare it right in the eye. It has no bearing on me. As I was teaching this, I kept seeing this thing. God began to show me, for example, one of the things that flows into this tormenting, viciousness. Viciousness. I saw a few minutes of a movie. I don't know the name of it. It was so vicious. It was so vicious with these two perpetrators, it was frightening. Because in what was depicted, if you got in the life, if they came into your life, there was no mercy. These people depicted viciousness, almost heart-stopping viciousness. And I was enthralled by it because I knew I was watching not what they were doing, but the depth of their character was that. Now, as I begin to violate this, as what it says, and Jesus says the love of many waxes cold, all these kind of things pour in. Hatred. We could go on and on and on. Anger. Bitterness. Resentment. All of these start to fill the vacuum. As this fills the vacuum, fear does that. A man and a woman get divorced. The man comes to the house, he's all bent out of shape, and the wife gets terrified, he kills her. Down in the jail, the worst group that they don't want to let out, and the ones that the prisoners are the most fearful of and won't let out of their cells are the teenagers. The reason that they're afraid of them, they don't want to let them out, is they have absolutely no character and they're unpredictable. Therefore, viciousness can surface like that and they're not prepared. Anything can trigger it. See, I just finished reading a book about the Second Vietnam, the war on crime. Even the hardcore old prisoners are terrified of these kids. There's no restraint in them. Viciousness. These things never move without a coordination of activity. The longer people walk in iniquity, and as it gathers, the more they are indifferent to the pain in people's lives. Therefore, it says, I don't have time to go this. They ever learn, but they can never come to the knowledge of the truth. As a result, they continue to listen to lies. Now we got the video games. And as I was reading about this, they said one of the reasons now that these kids come out and they can put the bullet between your eyes because they do this so much. They're constantly killing. They constantly kill. They have no, talks about 11-year-olds, this thing down in Virginia Tech. He walked in, he shot him right between the eyes. So when I begin to see this, the antidote, God has it, here it is. Herein is our love made perfect. He says that love can be made perfect. let me say then that any challenge that you have concerning love not being made perfect keeps that in tow, and it affects your relationship with Christ and with others. If I don't say, make your love perfect in me, you say, well, how does that happen? Last week I had a little something happen. I didn't know that it was my birthday coming up, and I hadn't heard from my daughter, frankly. Got a little bit ticked. So I drive down on Saturday to Marshall's. Bradley disorients me because there's a car in the parking in the driveway. So I go in, I think, well, they got company. I walk in, there's my daughter and her husband sitting in the living room. His wife brought him up. Early that morning, God began to deal with my heart on this little thing about letting it go, and preliminary to my going down there and finding out that they're here, God was now working in my heart, tempering with, reasoning with me not to let that stay there. And as I drove down before I ever got there, I was thanking God that He had worked in my heart to start pulling that little tick out. By the time I got there, it was perfectly gone. What is that? That is the love of Christ. See? But if the little ticks don't get up there, I won't know the process or see what God does as He starts to remove it. What He is working on is perfect love. If I don't have this, I'll never get it once all this other stuff breaks. And if your husband has it and the wife doesn't, she can't get it from her husband. You've got to have it going in. Secondly, there is no fear. That's what it says. There is no fear in love. If there is no fear in love, what must I be separated from? I got to be separated from my wife. Somebody says, what do you mean be separated from her? Got to give her to God. If I hold on to her and whatever's happening, well, I got to give my husband, got to give my kids, whatever holds me, God says you've got to be separated from it, because anything that you hold on to, when these type of things happen, will bring fear to your heart. I'll look at it and I'll say, I'm going to lose my wife. What will happen to my children? God says, let them go. In Matthew chapter 7, He says, if you love your children or your wife more than you love me, it doesn't work. My house, my home, my health, God says, let it all go. Somebody says, easier said than done. I first agree with that. But anything in my life that I'm holding on to, when it's threatened, will bring this word fear. When He says perfect love casts out fear, I now live in a condition where I've given it all to God and I trust Him. We go out here this morning and say in the congregation, how many trust God? Everybody. No, you won't find that true. But here He says, perfect love casts out fear, because fear hath, here it is, torment. I went back to the tormentor. He's the terrorist. What terrifies me is not the Arab, it's the fact that I might lose my job, I might lose my wife, I might lose my husband, I might lose. Anything that comes up on the I might lose scale, God says you got to be separated from it. Why? Because if you're not, you have a fear of whatever that attachment is, you're going to lose it. God says, I'm talking about you losing your life. You say, I read that, but He says, I'm also talking to you about finding your life. If I read that scripture, I'll read those two aspects. He says, look behind the scene and see what's attached, that you're attached to when I make this statement. Otherwise, I say, well, if I lose my life, No. God says the only way that your testimony can stand up is that you had no fear for your life and you overcame. In the Old Testament, there's no conquering, no overcoming. In the New Testament, it's all overcoming in this process. People say, well, I don't know about church and religion. That's not the point. Now, how do I know this is going to be an epidemic? I'm sorry?
She's making a phone call.
Okay, well, but this epidemic, he says, I'm going to strike heaven and earth and I'm going to shake everything. So when he begins to say that, I got to listen to that. And I've got to, if I was in Kansas this morning, or maybe Katrina, all these are forerunners. Why does this happen? Because in my mind, every day that I get up, my mind runs between these two tracks. For example, when you get up tomorrow, some of you may have children you got to send to school. That's part of my tract. I know what I'm doing this first thing in the morning. I go down to Caribou and I have my coffee. Then I have 2 jobs I'm going to get out. Then I want to get my car service and so on and so on. Those are my parameters. When you go to Kansas City, or that Greensburg, Kansas, these people no longer have these parameters. When I move you beyond what's normal and you get beyond those, fear sets in because I project ahead and say, what's going to happen to me? God says, I'm going to happen to you. This doesn't happen by simply somebody telling you, you're the one that has to ask for it, because when you get perfect love, you have a sound mind. During the Depression in 1929, people lost everything. Then they committed suicide. Go over to Luke chapter 21. They say that this thing of these bombs and so on, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. But because it hasn't happened, people begin to get lulled to sleep. But when it happens, another 9/11, all kinds of restaurants closed after 9/11 because people, they lost interest. When I read what Jesus says right here, verse 24, they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall lead away captive in all nations. Jerusalem shall be trodden down till the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. On June 7th, 1967, 5 o'clock in the morning, the Jews took the old city. Times of the Gentiles, when they took the old city, was fulfilled. But whenever God begins to bring something to conclusion, it doesn't hit a brick wall. It drifts into conclusions. So we're in that period of time where God is sending all kinds of messages to him. 9/11, a message. Al-Qaeda, a message. AIDS, storms, all messages. Why? Because segments of our nation are getting obliterated. An island off the coast of California, 80,000 acres are on fire. The whole state of Florida is under smoke this morning. Fires have broken out all over the state. I'm 76 years old, left 75 in the rearview mirror yesterday.
Happy birthday, Fred.
I thought you'd never offer. Don't get me anything, but I appreciate your card. Anyway, all of these things are designed to point us to what Jesus is saying. Jerusalem, and now I mentioned that God is dealing with his people, the Jews. All the nations are being judged now according to how they're going to deal with the Jews. But God's people, who are the church of God, he's dealing an entirely different program with them. He's trying to get his people separated and oriented and on him rock-wise, because he says, there shall be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Here it is, men's hearts failing for them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Jesus says this right there. He says it's going to be an epidemic. And it won't be like anything you've ever seen. That epidemic will be an epidemic of fear, and he says it's coming upon the world. It isn't just coming to Greensburg, Kansas, or Katrina. He says coming on the world. That means is you can't hide from it. Why would he do that? great ingathering. He's going to purify the church. All these people who are walking to iniquity, indifferent, blasé, divorced to remarry, all those kinds of things, he says their hearts, cardiac arrest. They will go outside of their parameters, their mind can't pick it up, and it'll be so expansive it'll stop their hearts. Then it says many are going to die because of it. He says you have one orientation where you can get, because where perfect love exists, you have my presence. Not in the building, here. Until I can experience that, I'm tied to every one of these things, my job, my family, and that's nothing wrong with that. I want you to release me to Christ so I can experience this perfect love. Do I have it? No. Is God working on it? Yes. How? Every incident of challenge that he brings, the little picks, the little things, the little aggravations, he says, I'm working now to perfect you on that. Give it up. Little something happens, you start to grow cold. Maybe a little indifferent toward you today. No. He says, as long as you carry some indifference, you slip over into Matthew 24, your love is cold. He says, your love can't be cold. He says, because you were neither hot nor cold. Listen to what he says. He says, I'm going to cast you out. I'm just going to spit you right out. So anyway, as I was reflecting on that, I said, you know what? The only thing I can do is ask for it. Lord, if you can say I can ask for your perfect love, I'm going to ask for it. Don't know how you're going to do it. I'm asking for it. I've got to have it. And if you get it, can't share it with anybody. This isn't like salvation, where you say, if you pray to receive Christ, you will now enter into the same awareness I have that Jesus lives. It doesn't work that way. He says, if you neglect salvation, that's not just being born again. That's another couple of words to look behind and see what they mean to me personally. You become, when you talk about a light, God uses you as the light. You have the treasure in an earthen vessel. You become an epistle of Christ. People don't run to some institution. They run up and say, Si, what do you got? And you don't tell them where you're going to church. You tell them what you have, and maybe the only hope they have is to receive Christ. Somebody who's absorbing this is in the process of coming to full maturity in Christ so that he realizes all of these things out here, literally, he has to let go of. And even if you make the decision, it isn't going to happen overnight. God will challenge you on something and say, you know what, you said you're giving up, you're letting go of that. Bang, something happens there. You didn't let go of it. I didn't let go of it. I've got to repent of that. Didn't let go of it. But I want to let go of it. If you want to let go of it, I'll help you. Meaning what? That it's gone right? No. A week later, he might say, it's time for me to take it away, and you say, take it. It's like after I read that book. Whew. I read that book, and I said, oh, does anybody in our government recognize that this guy has laid it all out? I was almost choked. It was awesome, wasn't it, Bill? Just awesome. And now they're talking about the Albanians, and publicly now, about these Albanians. It was already in the book. They have the Albanian mafia, weren't they? They're talking about these guys down at Fort Dix. You've been reading about this Albanian mafia group and so on and so on. Like this is brand new. We've known that a couple of years, haven't we? I read about that. I said, they're getting clued in. The guy that did that shooting in Utah in that mall, he was an Albanian. They've linked him to him. He's part of a network. They're putting it in the paper like, oh my gosh, this is brand new stuff. I knew about that 2 or 3 years ago, right? I'm looking at that and I'm saying, they're writing that in the newspaper like this is some revelation. Did you read anything about that? I read it and shook my head. I said, and this is just this one place that they're talking about. This is all over the country. All over the country.
Okay, I have a question. The fear thing interests me when you were talking about that, because it just seems like people are afraid to speak up when they know something is wrong. I don't think that's a coincidence. Like, for example, out in Richfield, they want to put in a giant mosque. in a relatively quiet town. And not only a mosque, but have two houses on that same property become families. So it's like a commune. The whole city of Richfield, town of Richfield, was against it, but the leaders were so afraid
They're afraid.
to say anything that they're letting them do it. And that's what is that what you're talking about? Kind of?
Actually, I'm going to speak in there 2 weeks from this morning. I'm going to deal with that. I will give you a clue about what that's about. The clue is, here's what God removes. He removes the mighty man, the man of war. He removes the judge, the prophet, the prudent, the ancient, the counselor, the cunning, and the eloquent. Then he says he will send children to be your princes, and babes shall be ruling over you, and the people shall be oppressed. Ayakoko has a book out right now. It's stated, where have the leaders gone? I'll tell you where they're gone. God's taken them away. What does he give you? He gives you babes. And what's the expression of babes? Is fear. Afraid to stand up for what's right. Our whole government is like that. The guy who was governor of New Jersey comes out publicly that this guy in Israel says, hey, that governor is gay. He and I had an affair. Oh, finally, governor fesses up and he says, I'm gay. He leaves his wife for this guy, under the situation. Let me tell you what he's applying for. Maybe you saw it in the paper. He's applying to be an Episcopal priest.
You'll fit right in with the
He was on TV in an interview about 6 months ago saying he's finally found peace.
Yes,
A priest
yeah.
told him
Yeah.
this was the way to go. He needs to be honest with himself and others.
Yeah.
Totally honest, so he's finally found himself.
Yeah.
Well,
And
say a piece of hell, though.
and he's left his wife and his children, and he's run around with another guy. I find that a little awkward to take. But what has happened, we're afraid to we call evil good and good evil today because of this word. See, a people lose their character. What I quoted you is in Isaiah chapter 3. God's whole program is when people get like you. If you read Daniel chapter 4, here's what he says. I will put the basest of men to rule over you. You know why? The people end up not knowing the difference. What do we have again? Ignorance. Yeah, Bill.
You know, it's not just the people in the political arena, though, that you know, aren't abreast of things and aren't doing what they ought to be doing. It's the people. It's the men that fill the pulpit across the country that name the name of Christ, and they have a fear of man, and the word says that brings a snare. No fear of God, that they're going to stand one day before Him and give an account for the 50, the 100, the 200, the 1,000, the 5,000. They're sitting under their preaching and teaching, and they're not instilling the fear, saying, "You're thinking about divorce? Don't even think about it."
Bill happened to be in a Bible study I had some time ago, and I brought up a subject biblically, and a guy got livid, didn't he? He got so livid, he couldn't even talk. He grabbed his Bible, slammed it shut, said, "Why did you bring that topic up?" It was on euthanasia. And I said, anybody can be forgiven for what they've done. He started storming out, didn't he? He said, in fact, he said, why did you even bring it? And he says, if you come back here, I won't come back again. Now this with euthanasia. Know what we found out? What I found out was he pulled the plug on his father. Maybe God touched a hot button in his heart on what he did, but what he did lies dormant in his heart until God pushes the button. All of a sudden there's a flare in his heart about his behavior. Now I'll tell you something else. When people are afraid, they don't want to hear the truth. The truth makes them upset. You see. So if I can keep you tranquilized in a state of, complacency, I got you. The devil has us right where he wants us. Because when this happens, two types of people will die. First of all, they're Gentiles. It's going to affect the whole world. People without this In fact, in Isaiah 23, God says, don't pray for the people anymore. He says their sin is irrevocable. He says this sin cannot be purged except through death. So there comes a time that God begins to work that way. When he begins to work that way, he will always have a remnant of people that he's prepared who have been alerted in advance of what they have to go before him to get, so he will now insulate them against these powers and they won't have any influence on his remnant. That remnant will be those who now reach out and people run up. You won't have to put the sign out, church. If people say, that guy is a Christian, I want to run over there and see what he's got. Because is it true? Nobody's going to argue with us at that time. You see, it will be demonstrated in the life of the people, which it isn't today for the most part. You see, God says, I want you to have perfect love. Nobody can give it to you. You can't. All you can do is say, Lord, whatever it takes to get me there, please get me there. Based on what Jesus said right there is the fact that it's going to be an epidemic. There will be an epidemic of fear. It'll make all of those threats of bird flu look like a box social. If I go back over to Psalm 140, verse 13. Now, it says, surely the righteous, in verse 13, surely the righteous shall give thanks unto thy name. The upright shall dwell in thy presence. When I use the word presence, then it goes back. Don't neglect salvation. Two things happen when I have perfect love. Number one, I have that. Number two, I have his presence. They work together. God can't reveal his presence to most people because most people are deficient in the love of Christ. You say, where are my deficiencies? Nobody can tell you where your deficiencies are unless you go to God and say, please reveal my deficiencies in what hinders me in my love for you and your love for me. A husband looks at a wife looks at a husband. She may say, do you love me? Or he may say, do you still love me? God says, if you're not working this process in me, you'll never even know what I'm talking about. It's like trying to talk to you about salvation before you're saved. You don't have a clue. You may hear the words, but they don't mean anything to you. God will give you the words that you can't hear so that you know it's out there, so you can ask for the words to be made real to you. When he does that, he says, you know what? I got you ready for the coming storm, so when you see tornadoes coming. Somebody was telling me the other day that at one stroke out in Kansas, they had 67 or 73 tornadoes at one time. I've been saved I've been on this earth quite a while. There are things going on I never heard of. There used to be tornadoes, maybe they tear the buildings down, maybe somebody got hurt, but nobody ever got killed. Now everybody, all kinds of people they got to go looking for them because they know they're there. So anyway, you can have it. It's up to you. God's the only one that can do it. This isn't anything somebody can teach for you to say, oh, gee, I understand everything you're telling me. What I'm saying is, as you go out, say, whatever I'm hearing, I don't really know what it means, but help me get it. At least I'm aware I can ask for it. You see, which makes me very alert to get rid of cold love. It's amazing if you ask God to show you how many times cold love starts to stir up. Maybe against your wife, or against your mother or father, or something. All of a sudden, and cold love is this way. I just don't really need him that close to me anymore. I just think I'll kind of ignore him. It's cold love. The minute that happens, that's exactly the way I start reacting to Christ. The minute I do that to him, because all sins are against the love of Christ, not just against whoever it's directed to. So anyway, that's, John, why don't you close this?